You know, my 300 years serving the Galactic Council, I thought I'd seen everything. Wars, plagues, species going extinct because they couldn't figure out how to use a can opener. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for dealing with humans. My name is Vextal, and I'm what you might call a professional diplomat. Picture a 7-foot-tall peacock that learned how to wear a suit and develop a superiority complex, and you've got the general idea. I represent the Galactic Council's Emergency Response Division, which sounds impressive until you realize it mostly involves me flying around the galaxy putting out fires that other species start. 3 weeks ago, I received the kind of call that makes you question your career choices. The Krex Empire and the Zephyrian Collective had decided to turn the Nexus trade hub into their personal battlefield. Now, the Nexus isn't just any trading post. It's the galaxy's largest commercial center, handling roughly 60% of all interstellar commerce. When two major civilizations decide to have a territorial dispute there, it's like setting up a boxing ring inside the Galactic Stock Exchange. The Krex are exactly what you'd expect from a species that names their children things like Destroyer of Worlds and He Who Crushes Bones. They're militaristic, aggressive, and have the collective diplomatic skills of a brick through a window. The Zephyrians, on the other hand, are tech-obsessed perfectionists who think every problem can be solved with a better algorithm. Naturally, these two got along about as well as fire and gasoline. So there I was, frantically scrolling through my list of species that might be willing to send peacekeepers. The usual suspects were either busy, bankrupt, or had specifically requested to never work with me again after the Great Mollusk Incident of 2387. That's when someone suggested Earth. The new kids on the galactic block. Humans had only joined the Council 5 years ago, and frankly, most of us were still trying to figure out what their deal was. They were young, energetic, and had this disturbing tendency to solve problems in ways that made absolutely no sense to anyone else. But desperate times call for desperate measures, so I placed the call to Earth's Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs. The human who answered looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days and was surviving purely on caffeine and spite. "Hi there," I began, putting on my most diplomatic voice. "This is Ambassador Vextal of the Galactic Council. We have a situation that requires immediate peacekeeping intervention." The human, who introduced herself as Director Lisa Chang, listened patiently as I explained the crisis. 2 major powers, civilian casualties mounting, economic catastrophe imminent, the whole 9 parsecs. "So you need peacekeepers," she said when I finished. "Yes, exactly. Military intervention to separate the warring factions and establish a ceasefire." She was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear her typing furiously. "We can have a team there in 48 hours. I nearly fell off my perch. Most species took weeks to mobilize peacekeeping forces. "That's excellent news. How many troops can you spare?" "Oh, we're not sending troops." My feathers literally ruffled. "I'm sorry, what?" "We're sending humanitarian aid. Our crisis response protocol prioritizes civilian welfare and conflict de-escalation through medical intervention." I stared at the screen, wondering if my translator was malfunctioning. "Director Chang, I don't think you understand. This is an active war zone. We need soldiers, not doctors." She smiled, and there was something deeply unsettling about it. "Trust me, Ambassador. We know exactly what we're doing." The call ended, and I spent the next hour staring at my office wall, wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my diplomatic career. Sending medical personnel into a war zone seemed like the kind of plan that gets you court-martialed or turned into a cautionary tale. But it was too late to back out now. I filed my report with the Council, carefully omitting the part where Earth was sending doctors instead of soldiers, and hoped that whatever the humans were planning wouldn't end with me explaining to the Council why the galaxy's largest trade hub had been converted into a crater. Little did I know I was about to witness the most terrifyingly effective peacekeeping operation in galactic history. 47 hours and 36 minutes later, the first human transport arrived at Nexus Station. I was waiting in the docking bay, trying to look official while secretly praying to whatever deities might listen that this wouldn't be a complete disaster. The first person off the transport was a woman who looked like she could simultaneously perform brain surgery and bench press a small spacecraft. Doctor. Mania, doctor. Maya Rodriguez had dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, warm brown eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of smile that made you feel simultaneously comforted and slightly terrified. Ambassador Vextal? She asked, extending a hand. Dr. Maya Rodriguez, Chief Medical Officer for Earth's Crisis Response Team. I understand you've got a bit of a situation here. A bit of a situation? I squawked. Doctor, there are currently 3 active battlefronts within the station perimeter, civilian casualties in the hundreds, and 2 fleets preparing for what can only be described as mutually assured economic destruction. She nodded thoughtfully. So, Tuesday then. Before I could process that response, 20 more humans filed off the transport. They were all wearing medical uniforms, but something about the way they moved suggested they'd be equally comfortable in a surgical theater or a combat zone. They immediately began unloading equipment that looked suspiciously advanced for medical gear. Dr. Rodriguez, I began carefully, your government did explain that this is an active war zone, correct? Oh yes, she said cheerfully, directing her team to set up what appeared to be a field hospital. Don't worry, Ambassador. We've dealt with conflict situations before. The second transport arrived an hour later, disgorging a man who looked like he'd stepped out of an action movie. Captain Buck Harrison was tall, broad-shouldered, and had the kind of easy confidence that came from knowing exactly how dangerous he was. He was followed by a team of technicians wheeling out crates marked with warnings in 17 different languages. Captain Harrison, Dr. Rodriguez called out, "How's our eye in the sky situation looking?" Buck grinned and patted one of the crates. "Just wait till you see these babies in action, Doc. Latest generation surveillance drones. They can track a flea from orbit and stream it in 4,000. I felt a small spark of hope. Surveillance drones could be useful for monitoring the situation. Oh, they're going to monitor the hell out of this situation, Buck said, and something about his tone made my tail feathers twitch nervously. The third transport brought the strangest arrival of all. Professor Edmund Thornfield looked like he'd stepped out of a university library, complete with wire-rimmed glasses, rumpled jacket, and the general air of someone who found reality mildly disappointing compared to his theoretical models. He was accompanied by a single assistant and a device that looked distinctly ominous. "Professor," I said, approaching cautiously, "what exactly is that?" He adjusted his glasses and beamed at me with the enthusiasm of someone about to explain their favorite hobby. "Oh, this is a probability assessment station. It calculates the likelihood of various outcomes based on current data inputs and behavioral patterns." The device was roughly the size of a small vehicle and covered in screens, sensors, and what appeared to be a large digital countdown timer. As I watched, several technicians began setting it up in the station's main concourse, where everyone would be able to see it. "It looks like a Doomsday clock," I said. Professor Thornfield's smile widened. "That's because it essentially is one. Though Doomsday is such a dramatic term. I prefer civilization termination probability indicator." I stared at him. "You brought a civilization termination probability indicator to a trade station." "Oh yes, it's amazing how much more reasonable people become when they can see their chances of continued existence displayed in real time." By this point, word of the human arrivals had spread throughout the station. Krex warriors and Zephyrian tech specialists had both sent reconnaissance teams to observe these newcomers, and both groups looked equally confused. I watched as Dr. Rodriguez approached a wounded Krex soldier who was being treated by the station's overwhelmed medical staff. The Krex medic tried to wave her away, but she simply smiled and began examining the patient with professional efficiency. "Interesting wound pattern," she observed, running a scanner over the soldier's injured arm. Zephyrian plasma burns, but the scarring suggests this isn't your first encounter with their weapons. How long have you been fighting this particular conflict? The Krex soldier, surprised by her clinical interest, actually answered, 6 months. Ever since they tried to claim salvage rights on Sector 7. Salvage rights, Dr. Rodriguez repeated, making notes on her tablet. And how's that working out for you? Achieving your strategic objectives? The soldier looked uncomfortable. We are making progress. Meanwhile, Captain Buck was having his own conversation with a Zephyrian tech specialist who was eyeing the drone deployment with professional curiosity. Impressive hardware, the Zephyrian admitted. What's the surveillance range on those units? Oh, these little guys can see everything, Buck replied casually. Real-time battle analysis, casualty assessment, even emotional state monitoring. Amazing what you can tell about someone's decision-making process when you're watching from the right angle. The Zephyrian's antennae twitched with interest. You're monitoring emotional states? Among other things. Really fascinating data. For instance, did you know that 67% of combat decisions in this conflict have been driven by ego rather than tactical necessity? I was beginning to realize that the humans hadn't misunderstood the situation at all. They'd simply approached it from a completely different angle than anyone expected. And judging by the increasingly nervous expressions on the faces of both warring factions, their approach was already having an effect. The Doomsday clock finished booting up with a cheerful chime, and its display lit up with a message that sent a chill down my spine. Current civilization termination probability, 23.7% and rising. Professor Thornfield adjusted his glasses and smiled at the gathering crowd. Now then, who'd like to hear about statistical probability theory? Within 6 hours of the humans' arrival, Dr. Rodriguez had established 3 fully operational medical stations positioned strategically around the conflict zones. Her approach to combat medicine was, to put it mildly, unconventional. Next patient, she called out cheerfully, as a heavily wounded Krex warrior was carried in by his squad mates. The warrior was missing half his left arm and had what appeared to be severe burns across his torso. Krex physiology, plasma burns, possible nerve damage, Dr. Rodriguez muttered, already running scanners over the patient. Don't worry, big guy, we're going to get you fixed right up. The Krex warrior tried to growl something threatening, but Dr. Rodriguez was having none of it. Save your energy for healing, she said firmly, injecting him with something that immediately calmed his aggressive posturing. Now, while we work on that arm, let's talk about your anger issues. I was observing from a safe distance and I nearly choked on my own beak. Did she just say anger issues? The Krex warrior blinked in confusion as Dr. Rodriguez began reconstructing his damaged limb with technology that seemed decades ahead of anything I'd seen before. What do you mean? Anger issues? Well, look at the pattern of your injuries, she explained patiently, working with practiced efficiency. 17 separate plasma burns, 3 broken bones that healed improperly, and stress markers in your blood chemistry that suggest chronic rage management problems. This isn't your first fight, is it? The warrior shifted uncomfortably. I am Krex. Fighting is our nature. Fighting, sure. But fighting stupid? That's a choice. Dr. Rodriguez looked up from her work with those warm, terrifying eyes. Tell me, what exactly are you fighting for? To defend our territorial claims against Zephyrian expansion. Uh-huh. And what specific territory are we talking about? The warrior's certainty wavered. The salvage rights to Sector 7? Which consists of what exactly? Space, debris, and old shipping containers. Dr. Rodriguez nodded sympathetically. So you've been getting shot up for 6 months over garbage collection rights. How's that working out for your sense of self-worth? In the bed next to him, a wounded Zephyrian was receiving similar treatment from one of Dr. Rodriguez's team members. The medic, a cheerful woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, was running psychological profiles while repairing damaged cybernetic implants. Fascinating neural patterns she observed, making notes on her tablet. Your anxiety levels are off the charts. When did you last perform a comprehensive systems check on your emotional regulation software? The Zephyrian's optical sensors flickered with embarrassment. Our emotional regulation systems are functioning within normal parameters. Honey, your stress hormones are so elevated you're practically vibrating. This isn't about territorial expansion, is it? You're terrified the Kreks are going to outcompete you commercially. Meanwhile, Captain Buck's drones had become ubiquitous throughout the station. They were small, silent, and seemed to appear wherever something interesting was happening. The feeds from these drones were being broadcast on public screens throughout the station, providing a real-time documentary of the conflict. Live from the Nexus Trade Hub, Buck announced over the station's communication system, "We bring you continuous coverage of the Kreks-Zephyrian conflict." Coming up at the top of the hour, exclusive footage of Kreks Command ordering attacks on civilian medical facilities, followed by Zephyrian leadership discussing the acceptable casualty rates for economic advantage. Both factions immediately began jamming attempts, but somehow Buck's drones kept broadcasting, and the footage was damning. The Kreks military leadership was shown discussing civilian casualties as acceptable losses. The Zephyrian collective was recorded calculating profit margins versus body counts. Both sides were revealed to be fighting not for ideology or survival, but for mundane commercial advantages. "This is a violation of our privacy," protested General Thokmar, the Kreks military commander. Actually, Professor Thornfield chimed in from his probability station, according to Galactic Council Resolution 447B, that all military actions within neutral trade zones are subject to documentation for war crimes tribunals. The drones are simply ensuring accurate record-keeping. The Doomsday clock now read civilization termination probability, but 31.4%, and Professor Thornfield had begun offering hourly lectures on probability theory to anyone who would listen. "You see," he explained to a growing audience of both civilians and combatants, "the current trajectory suggests a 94.7% chance of complete economic collapse within the Nexus system if hostilities continue for another 72 hours. This would result in supply chain disruptions affecting approximately 4 billion beings across 17 star systems." A Zephyrian logistics officer raised a tentacle. "But surely the probability calculations don't account for our superior tactical algorithms." Professor Thornfield adjusted his glasses and smiled. "Oh, but they do. In fact, your algorithms are performing exactly as predicted. You're both following textbook conflict escalation patterns with 97.3% accuracy. It's really quite fascinating from a behavioral psychology standpoint." The most disturbing part of the whole operation was how effective it was becoming. Both sides were still fighting, but with noticeably less enthusiasm. The wounded warriors being treated by Dr. Rodriguez's team were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about their motivations. The drone footage was making both leadership groups look petty and greedy. And the Doomsday clock was creating a psychological pressure that no one could ignore. "Dr. Rodriguez," I approached her during a brief lull in casualties. "I have to ask, is this standard human peacekeeping protocol?" She looked up from a Zephyrian she was treating for what appeared to be a stress-induced system crash. "Peacekeeping? Oh no, Ambassador. This is humanitarian aid. We're just treating the symptoms." "The symptoms?" "War is just a symptom, usually of unresolved psychological and social issues. You treat the underlying causes, the symptoms tend to resolve themselves." I stared at her, then at the gradually quieting battlefield around us. Has this approach ever failed? Dr. Rodriguez's smile was absolutely terrifying in its confidence. "Not yet." By day 3 of the human intervention, both the Kreks and Zephyrian forces had reached the same conclusion: the humans had to go. It wasn't that the medical care was unwelcome. Dr. Rodriguez's team had achieved healing rates that bordered on miraculous, and even the most hardened warriors were beginning to appreciate having their chronic injuries properly treated. But the constant psychological analysis, the embarrassing drone footage, and the ever-climbing Doomsday clock were creating a morale problem that both command structures found unacceptable. The decision to attack the medical stations was made simultaneously by both factions, which would have been a touching moment of unity under different circumstances. General Thokmar gathered his most elite warriors in what he thought was a secure briefing room. "The humans must be eliminated," he declared, his scarred face grim with determination. "They are weakening our fighting spirit with their mind games and alien medicine." 3 sectors away, Collective Prime ZX Loth was reaching the same conclusion. "The human interference has introduced variables that our combat algorithms cannot accommodate. They must be neutralized to restore operational efficiency." Both leaders were confident their forces could overwhelm a handful of medical personnel. Both were about to learn why humans had become the galaxy's most requested crisis intervention specialists in just 5 years. The first attack came at 0347 local time. A squad of 6 Krex shock troops approached Medical Station Alpha with the intention of destroying the facility and capturing Dr. Rodriguez for interrogation. They moved with professional silence, using stealth generators to avoid detection. They made it within 30 meters before Dr. Rodriguez's voice rang out across the station's communication system. "Attention Krex assault team approaching Medical Station Alpha. Please note that attacking medical facilities is a class of war crime under 17 different galactic conventions. However, if you'd like to discuss your feelings about this decision, I have tea ready and my schedule is completely open." The shock troops froze, looking around in confusion. Their stealth generators were military grade. There was no way they should have been detected. Also, Dr. Rodriguez continued conversationally, "You might want to check your weapons. We've been having some technical difficulties with military equipment lately." Squad leader Vrakthi tried to activate his plasma rifle, only to discover that it now displayed a cheerful message, "Weapon temporarily disabled for mandatory safety inspection. Have a nice day." All 6 warriors tried their weapons with identical results. "What is this sorcery?" Vrakthi snarled into his comm unit. "Not sorcery," came Captain Buck's voice apparently from everywhere at once. "Just standard electronic warfare protocols. Those drones I mentioned? They've been mapping your equipment signatures for 3 days. Amazing what you can accomplish with a little predictive hacking." The Krex assault team found themselves surrounded by Dr. Rodriguez's medical staff, who approached with the calm professionalism of people who had done this many times before. The medics were all smiling, which somehow made the situation infinitely more terrifying. "Now then," Dr. Rodriguez said, appearing with a medical scanner and a cup of tea, "let's talk about what's really bothering you. I'm sensing a lot of suppressed trauma and some serious authority issues." The simultaneous Zephyrian attack on Medical Station Beta was proceeding with similar success. 8 combat specialists had approached using their most advanced stealth technology, only to find their path illuminated by helpful signs reading "This way to therapy session" and emotional support available here. Their weapons suffered the same mysterious malfunctions, and they found themselves facing Dr. Sarah Kim, who greeted them with the enthusiasm of someone meeting old friends. "Oh, wonderful, more patience. I was just telling your colleague here about the fascinating correlation between aggressive behavior and unresolved childhood abandonment issues." The colleague in question was a Zephyrian combat unit who had somehow been convinced to sit down for what appeared to be an impromptu counseling session. Meanwhile, the Doomsday clock had begun chiming ominously. Professor Thornfield's voice echoed through the station with the matter-of-fact tone of someone delivering a weather report. "Attention all station personnel. The civilization termination probability has now reached 47.3% following the coordinated attacks on medical facilities. Current projections indicate a 73% chance of complete societal breakdown within the next 18 hours if current behavioral patterns continue. Both command centers immediately tried to contact their assault teams, only to discover that their communications were being intercepted and rebroadcast on the public screens throughout the station. "VRAC EE, report your status," General Thok-Mar's voice boomed through the corridors. "Sir, I am currently discussing my relationship with my father with the human doctor. She makes excellent tea and has very insightful observations about intergenerational trauma." "What?" "Soldier, eliminate the humans immediately." "I'm trying, sir, but my weapon won't function and she's helping me understand why I always feel the need to prove myself through violence." "Did you know that suppressed emotional pain often manifests as aggressive behavior toward authority figures?" Similar conversations were being broadcast from the Zephyrian forces, creating a surreal situation where both command structures found themselves inadvertently participating in group therapy sessions conducted via public communication channels. Captain Buck's voice cut through the chaos with helpful commentary. "This has been live coverage of the first recorded instance of involuntary military counseling in galactic history. Stay tuned for more heartwarming moments of personal growth through crisis intervention." I watched the entire spectacle from the safety of my diplomatic office, frantically updating my reports to the Galactic Council. How do you explain that a handful of human medical personnel had effectively neutralized 2 military forces without firing a single shot? The most disturbing part was that both assault teams were now voluntarily remaining at the medical stations, engaged in what appeared to be intensive therapy sessions. Several warriors from both sides had actually requested additional counseling time. "Dr. Rodriguez," I finally worked up the courage to ask, "how is this possible?" She looked up from a group session that included 3 Krex Marines and 4 Zephyrian combat specialists, all of whom were sharing their feelings about the conflict. "Oh, this is just standard combat medic training," she said cheerfully. "Rule 1 of battlefield medicine: you can't heal the body if you don't address the underlying psychological trauma. Rule 2, hurt people hurt people. Rule 3, most wars are just really expensive group therapy sessions with inadequate facilitators." The Doomsday clock chimed again, now reading 52.1%, and I realized that the humans had turned the entire conflict into some kind of twisted psychological experiment. And it was working. By day 4, something unprecedented was happening on Nexus Station. Both sides were voluntarily attending Dr. Rodriguez's group therapy sessions. It started with the captured assault teams, but word had spread that the human doctor could actually help with the chronic nightmares, anxiety attacks, and rage blackouts that most combat veterans experienced. Soon, warriors from both factions were quietly showing up during their off-duty hours. "So, Graktor," Dr. Rodriguez said to a massive Krex warrior who looked like he could bench press a small moon, "you mentioned having trouble sleeping. Tell us about that." Graktor shifted uncomfortably on the specially reinforced chair. Around him, 5 other warriors from both species listened with the awkward attention of people discovering they weren't alone in their struggles. "Ever since the first battle at Sector 7, I see the explosions when I close my eyes, and the screams of the wounded. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm still there." A Zephyrian tech specialist named Q-Sneth's optical sensors dimmed in recognition. "I experience similar recursive memory loops. Our efficiency algorithms don't account for emotional processing delays." "That's because you're both dealing with combat trauma," Dr. Rodriguez explained patiently. "Your species might be different, but psychological injury follows predictable patterns. The real question is, what were you fighting for that was worth this level of suffering?" The room fell silent. It was a question that had been bothering everyone involved, but nobody had been willing to voice it directly. Graktor was the first to speak. "Salvage rights to Sector 7. "And what exactly is in Sector 7? "Old shipping containers, derelict transport vessels, space debris, worthless junk," Q-Sneth added quietly. "Our preliminary surveys indicated minimal resource value." Dr. Rodriguez nodded encouragingly. "So you've both been getting shot, losing friends and developing chronic psychological trauma over garbage collection rights. The silence that followed was deafening. Meanwhile, Captain Buck had been busy with his own project. His surveillance drones had been working around the clock for 3 days, but not just on monitoring the conflict. They had been building something in the abandoned cargo bay of Sector 7 itself. Ladies, gentlemen, and various other sentient beings, Buck announced over the station's communication system, I'd like to invite everyone to attend the grand opening of the Sector 7 Memorial Trade Center. The holographic projectors activated, displaying a massive, gleaming structure that seemed to materialize in the previously empty space. It was beautiful, functional, and designed to accommodate the specific needs of dozens of different species. State-of-the-art facilities, Buck continued his sales pitch, with dedicated sections for both Krex military hardware dealers and Zephyrian technology exchanges, plus neutral zones for interspecies commerce, recreational facilities, and even a medical center staffed by competent professionals. Both command centers immediately dispatched reconnaissance teams to investigate, only to discover that the trade center wasn't just a hologram. The drones had been 3D printing the entire structure using recycled materials from the debris field that had started the whole conflict. How is this possible? General Thokmar demanded over the comm. Turns out your garbage was actually pretty valuable, Buck replied cheerfully. Rare metals, advanced composites, salvageable technology. My drones have been sorting and repurposing everything while you two were busy shooting each other. The trade center should generate approximately 40,000 times more revenue than the raw salvage rights you were fighting over. Professor Thornfield chose that moment to make an announcement from his probability station. Attention all personnel. I have excellent news regarding our civilization termination probability readings. The Doomsday clock, which had been climbing steadily for days, suddenly began counting down instead of up. Current probability of societal collapse has dropped to 12.3% and falling, thanks to the implementation of the Mutual Prosperity Agreement now available at all information terminals. I rushed to the nearest terminal, where a document had appeared written in the kind of legal language that made my head hurt just reading it. But the basic terms were surprisingly simple. Both sides would jointly operate the new trade center, splitting profits based on actual contribution rather than territorial claims. All disputes would be resolved through binding arbitration administered by neutral parties. And most importantly, both factions agreed to mandatory psychological support for all military personnel. This is ridiculous, General Thokmar's voice boomed through the station. The Krex Empire does not negotiate with enemies. Actually, Dr. Rodriguez's voice cut in, you've been negotiating for 4 days. Every therapy session was essentially a diplomatic discussion about underlying needs and concerns. You've already worked through most of your major issues. What she said, added Kyxneth from the Zephyrian Command Center. Our behavioral analysis indicates a 94.7% compatibility rate for cooperative commercial ventures. The Doomsday clock chimed cheerfully and displayed a new message, civilization termination probability reduced to 3.2%. Congratulations on choosing prosperity over destruction. I found myself standing in the station's main concourse, watching as warriors from both sides examined the Mutual Prosperity Agreement with the careful attention of people who had realized they might have been fighting the wrong battle all along. Dr. Rodriguez, I said, approaching her with something approaching awe, did you plan all of this from the beginning? She looked up from helping a Krex veteran fill out a job application for the new Trade Center's security department. Plan is a strong word. But we did run probability models before we arrived. Professor Thornfield's algorithm suggested a 73% chance that this was essentially a commercial dispute disguised as a territorial conflict. And if you had been wrong? Her smile was pure confidence. Ambassador, humans have been turning swords into plowshares for thousands of years. Sometimes literally, sometimes metaphorically. But the principle remains the same. Most conflicts are just resource allocation problems with inadequate communication. The Doomsday clock reached 1.1% and began playing what sounded suspiciously like a celebration song. 6 months later, I found myself standing in the observation deck of what was now officially called the Nexus Sector 7 commercial complex, watching the most successful trade hub in 3 sectors conduct its daily business. The Scifi War, as historians were already calling it, had lasted exactly 4 days after human intervention began. The peace had lasted ever since. General Thokmar now ran the complex's security division with the same military precision he had once applied to warfare, except now he was protecting profits instead of destroying them. His former enemy, Neth, managed the technological infrastructure with algorithmic efficiency that maximized everyone's productivity. They had also become, improbably, friends. I watched them having lunch together in the food court, discussing expansion plans for the complex's entertainment district with the easy camaraderie of old colleagues. Both were regular attendees at Dr. Rodriguez's ongoing support groups, which had evolved into a combination business networking event and group therapy session. "Fascinating case study," Professor Thornfield said, appearing beside me with a tablet full of data. "The long-term psychological benefits of addressing underlying trauma have improved both species' military effectiveness by approximately 340%, not to mention the economic benefits." The numbers were staggering. The Nexus Sector 7 complex was generating more revenue in a month than the entire disputed salvage operation would have produced in a decade. Both the Krex Empire and Zephyrian Collective were now competing to establish similar joint ventures in other sectors. "Professor," I asked, "was this outcome really predictable?" He adjusted his glasses with the satisfaction of someone whose theories had been proven correct. "Oh yes, humans have been using this basic approach for centuries. Medical intervention, psychological support, economic incentives, and just enough apocalyptic pressure to motivate rational decision-making." Captain Buck's voice crackled over the comm system, now permanently integrated into the complex's operations. "Daily surveillance report, 0 hostile actions detected. Productivity up 12% from yesterday. And I'm proud to announce that the Krex-Zephyrian joint military exercises are now the most requested training program in the sector." The joint military exercises were perhaps the most surreal development of all. What had started as therapy sessions had evolved into collaborative training programs where both species shared tactics and technology. The galaxy's 2 most aggressive civilizations had become its most effective peacekeeping partnership. I was finally ready to file my after-action report with the Galactic Council, though I knew they would never believe half of it. "Council File 4427X, I dictated to my recorder. Subject, Human Peacekeeping Methodologies. Assessment, terrifyingly effective. I paused, trying to find diplomatic language for what I had witnessed. The human approach to conflict resolution appears to be based on the premise that most wars are symptoms of unaddressed psychological and economic issues. Their intervention strategy combines medical care, psychological counseling, economic incentives, and strategic pressure to create conditions where continued fighting becomes irrational. That was the sanitized version. The truth was far more disturbing. The truth was that humans had taken one look at a hopeless military conflict and casually solved it by treating the combatants like patients in need of therapy. They had turned warfare into group counseling and somehow made it work. Personal observation, I continued my report. Humans appear to view conflict resolution as a medical problem. They diagnose the underlying causes, treat the symptoms, and implement long-term care plans to prevent relapse. I thought about Dr. Rodriguez, now running a permanent crisis intervention center on the complex. She was already training personnel from 17 different species in her techniques. The Galactic Council had received requests from 43 systems asking for human medical peacekeepers. Recommendation: the Council should seriously consider establishing formal protocols for human crisis intervention. However, be advised that their methods may cause psychological distress among traditional military leadership due to their effectiveness. I closed the recording and looked out at the thriving complex below. Humans were terrifying, but not in the way most species expected. They were terrifying because they had weaponized empathy and turned healing into a military strategy. And it worked. My communicator chimed with an incoming message from Earth's Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs. Director Chang's familiar face appeared on the screen. Ambassador Vextal, I hope you're well. I wanted to let you know that based on the success of the Nexus operation, we're expanding our crisis intervention program. We'll soon have medical peacekeeping teams available for deployment throughout the galaxy. I felt my feathers ruffle involuntarily. That's excellent news, Director. Oh, and Ambassador? We've received reports of a potential conflict developing in the Outer Rim between the Molossi Federation and the Silicon Collective. Something about disputed mining rights. The Council hasn't made a formal request yet, but we wanted you to know we're ready to help. The call ended, and I stared at the screen for a long moment. Somewhere in the galaxy, 2 more civilizations were about to discover that when you asked Earth for peacekeepers, you got medics, drones, and a doomsday clock. And somehow, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. I opened a new file and began drafting a report titled Human Expansion of Medical Peacekeeping Operations, Recommendations for Galactic Mental Health Preparedness. After all, if humans were going to solve every conflict in the galaxy through aggressive therapy and economic rehabilitation, the rest of us needed to be prepared for the psychological implications. I had a feeling that the galaxy was about to become a much more emotionally healthy place, whether it wanted to or not. And frankly, that thought was both comforting and absolutely terrifying.